For this lesson, underneath a chapter of, website structure and website stuff in general, we're going to talk about a little bit about website health. And this is usually a topic under the technical SEO bucket, which I know earlier on I mentioned that the technical SEO is a big part of SEO, but it's something that probably out of scope for this masterclass. But I want to touch on some things related to website health and technical SEO, so you or your teams are at least aware of details of what you should care about and what things are and what your agency should be keeping tabs on and what you should be worried about, things like that. So technical SEO is a big monster. There's a lot of details. It could go a lot of different directions. It's usually a little more prominent in websites that are like e-commerce sites or websites that have tens of thousands of pages. So a lot of the technical things that are at that level, the enterprise level, are just probably not applicable to most franchise brands, but there are elements of technical SEO that are tied to the website health that you need to kind of make sure you're checking those boxes and at least everything is in a good place for all your other elements of SEO to work properly. So let's go ahead and just get started. The first thing I want to talk about is website architecture. And so this is more of the functionality, the structure, different elements of the website as a whole that matter when it comes to technical SEO or your overall health. I mean, one of them being the fact that your URL structure needs to be a certain way. There's lots of different ways to do it, but you're basically trying to give Google a clear understanding of the path to the pages that matter or how they are tied together. So you want, for instance, you want your location pages all tied to that location. You want your blog all tied to a blog. You want your national content and resources, everything's kind of grouped and lumped together. And how that actually gets organized and how Google reads it is a lot through the URL structure. And so that's why that becomes important. A lot of times there'll be web design agencies that they don't have a really deep understanding of SEO. They'll design beautiful websites. I mean, looks great. Everybody's happy with them, but then they hand them over and the website doesn't rank. And then somebody usually calls someone like me and says, "Hey, come take a look at our website. We want to rank it." And I go look at it and go, wow, there's just so many things that need to be adjusted to account for SEO. And so this is why there's usually a synergy between web design firms and SEO firms. But, a lot of you are going to go out there and just find a web design firm or find somebody locally and you're going to get this website built. And you're not even going to know it's going to take more thousands of dollars of time to undo and fix and adjust what that web design firm has done. So today, I want to talk about some of the things I want you to be aware of that when you're having these conversations that you want to get a sense of whether your web design firm actually has a grip on this stuff or not. And if not, then you should seek out a consultant that can come in and kind of help you with the project by working alongside the design agency to kind of see their page templates, their structure, how they're going to do things, what they're going to change if you have an existing website, stuff like that. One of the things that I seem to notice a lot is whenever a less experienced design agency were to take on a client, and they usually go straight and pull up a WordPress template. There's thousands of WordPress templates out there that you can buy that you think is just helping you speed up the process. And yeah, you can buy the template, put it up and just go and edit things. But usually those templates really bloated and rattled with SEO issues. And the reason why they're bloated is because they're trying to create a template that does so many things to be attracted to so many different business and industries that they pack it with all these things and features. And then, when you grab it and use it just for the little pieces that you need it for, everything else is still built in there. And it's just weighing the website down. And also, they're not really designing templates for SEO. They're designing templates for good web design and layout and things like that. So that's kind of where you have to worry about anybody off the street that you're going to hire to build you a site. And if they use a template, then I would definitely worry. A lot of times you can use templates just to get yourself layouts and design ideas. And then you actually end up custom building the template, which is perfectly acceptable because usually someone who custom builds a template is removing all that fluff and all that bloat. So you just get a nice clean website that doesn't, isn't weighed down by a bunch of stuff you don't need. Also, what I notice when I, usually get brought in to look at a website that's been designed or developed by a web design agency is they have a lot of redirect problems. So a lot of times you have an existing website and, for your small business or your corporate location, you didn't really weren't ready for franchising yet. So you have the site and now you want to convert it to a franchise site. When you hire an agency to do a redesign and readjustment, well, if they don't know what they're doing, they end up wanting to change all the URLs because they want it to fit either the template they're using that has a certain structure or some type of standard structure that they like to use that they can understand that has some kind of hierarchy when how they design a website. Well, anytime you're changing a bunch of URLs, I would immediately consider that a red flag and I would worry. So a lot of times I come in and the first thing I do is I analyze the site by side. And first thing I see is the URLs are changed. I already know this thing's going to experience some major problems. So that's one of the things you really need to be aware of is how many of the URLs are going to change. And, this is usually where I see the franchise platforms that are kind of stuck with some type of URL structure. They have to use those URLs for it to fit their technology. And that's when there's big problems because you can't undo that. Whereas at least with WordPress, once someone like me identifies that problem, I can actually get that fixed and undo it. And then, everything ends up being okay. But, once you're into a certain platform, you have a big problem there when you can't actually make that change. So I see all these redirects that are not used properly. The next biggest problem I see are duplicate content issues. So this is where I see they build a blog and then blog categories and blog archives. And, then you add in the franchisee level of things. And now you have local blogs for franchisees. It just becomes a duplicate content disaster and lightly a cannibalization disaster because you have too much content that is the same. And when Google sees that, they put their hands up and say, we don't know which one to rank. We're seeing too many similar things. So we're just going to keep it all depressed. So a lot of times, I'll jump in and pick that up and have to make a lot of changes to fix the duplicate content issues. And a lot of times what also happens with these agencies is they'll build nice landing pages that are supposed to be for Google ads or Facebook ads or some other elements and more for sales and conversions. And those are the pages that actually perform the worst. And so when it comes to how it would affect your SEO, because what they're doing is they're allowing those pages to be seen by Google. So it's okay to have those, but it seems like these agencies will just build them in there. And the next thing I know, I have 10 pages that are very similar and Google's going, you know what, we're actually going to hurt your website now because this is getting ridiculous. So that's always a problem. The other problem I see a lot of is internal linking. Like I'll have a site perfectly internally linked, everything's flowing and connecting in the right way and how Google wants to see it. And then a redesign happens and that design agency has no idea the importance of those things and they want to make everything clean and simple. So they just eliminate a lot of that. And the next thing you know, your website plummets in the rankings. So internal linking is something I look at as well to see what changed there because there's an actual proper order of things. And when it comes to SEO, and a lot of designers just don't understand that. The other thing is when I see an agency that doesn't have experience design and build a site, the location finder, the map technology where all your locations are going to be living, they're not set up to maximize SEO value. It might look good, it might function good for the user, but when Google's robot comes through there and reads it and is trying to figure out what to do with that information, that's where it's usually, I see the problem with them, blocking the bots or there not being any internal linking that passes relevance and power to franchisees. And so anyway, those are the main areas that I look for and I commonly see problems in whenever I take on a client where they would want me to look at their website after a redesign. Or if they're ahead of the curve, then they would reach out to me and say, hey, I'm working with this agency. They're great designers. I just wanted you to have another set of eyes on this to make sure everything is structured properly. And, that's where usually I can work with the agency. They give me information, these pages they're building, and I immediately give them feedback. So when they actually develop it and build it, they're doing the right things and you get the best of both worlds there. So that's the type of stuff related to website architecture that I wanted to bring up. I mean, the other things I have on my list is, mobile responsiveness. Google's really looking at mobile first. So a lot of times when somebody's designing a page for mobile, they're hiding things and they're adjusting things. And some of those things end up not being optimized for Google. And therefore the whole website actually underperforms. In fact, Google started a while back looking at your mobile version first, and they actually evaluate that and use that to determine your SEO and not so much your desktop version. So when you're looking at your desktop version, your mobile version side by side, and you're scrolling down, you see anything different or missing or hidden or something like that, that means there's a good chance Google is either devaluing the stuff that's missing, or completely changing how they're analyzing your page for SEO. So, that's something that you want to be aware of. And then accessibility is more about just something I want you to be aware of, that, legally your website needs to be easy for people with disabilities that are either blind or have some type of brain damage or different things, that when they need to surf the internet, they use special tools to help them do that. And those tools are structured a certain way that if that person trying to use their special mouse or their special lenses or special buttons to do certain things, it doesn't work if you don't have your website structured a certain way. And therefore, you actually put yourself at risk to getting a lawsuit, because now you're basically limiting someone's ability to interact with you. So just want you to throw that out there, that accessibility becomes an issue, because Google's actually starting to look for that stuff too, and making sure that your website is checking those boxes, because that's an indication of good website health. So that's basically the overview of the architecture piece of it. Now let's go ahead and look at Google Search Console. This is usually where you're going to identify or be told when there's website health problems. And so it may not be the place where you address them. It's just a place where Google's going to say, error, issues, whatever. And so I'm going to kind of talk through the stuff you'll see there, so you're aware of it and know what you should be paying attention to or not. So inside Google Search Console, there is a section called performance. This is what I look at mostly. So when you're dealing with Google Search Console, it's all about what's happening inside Google search and how your website is interacting with search. So it has nothing to do with Google ads, it has nothing to do with any traffic or anything that happens besides people that go to Google first, search for your brand name or search for some type of keyword, a product or service keyword, and they find your website. And then Google's using it to analyze your website and give you information. What Google Search Console was meant for was for webmasters to see how Google's evaluating your website, as far as a health perspective or a structural perspective, and where it's having issues with reading your website or crawling your website. And then when they have those types of issues, then it makes it harder for them to know where to rank you. And so that's where Google Search Console started. But in there, they started putting performance information, a bunch of other information. So it became a very well-rounded thing. But this is the tool that SEO professionals are using the most. At least they should. I definitely spend my whole life in there. I'm rarely in Google Analytics. I'm always in Google Search Console, because it's usually related to what I'm doing for the website I'm working on. So inside there, there's performance data, which is the standard stuff: impressions, clicks, click-through rate. You can filter all your data by page, country, device, things like that. But when it comes to the website health side of things, there's a section in there, and you'll see it on the left that it says indexing. And so the indexing section will be underneath that section. You'll have some little subsections called pages or video pages. And what they're basically going to tell you are, let's say you have 100 pages. They're going to tell you these 50 pages are indexed and these 50 pages are not indexed. And, you're asking yourself, well, why wouldn't Google want to index a page? Well, Google doesn't want to waste their resources on a bunch of BS, essentially. And so they have an evaluation process. And if they determine a page is not worthy of being in Google, they're going to de-index it. And so when you're an SEO guy, you're first going to look at that page and say, well, is this page important? And if it is, then you want to fix the problem. If it's not, then you want to consider an alternative, because there's no reason to have a bunch of pages on your site that aren't valuable to Google. That's the whole point of this thing. So then you would do things like de-index the page, no follow the page, no index the page, so Google doesn't actually find it or see it. Maybe the user likes it, whatever it may be. So the question you should ask yourself is, why is this page not indexed? That's usually because it has thin or duplicate content. It has a very bad internal linking structure. So when I talked about internal linking and pointing to pages, that's kind of what I see often that would cause a page not to be indexed. And I also recommend check your mobile version, because your mobile version could have these types of issues, but your desktop version doesn't. So that usually is a leading case for why a page isn't indexed, because your mobile version isn't optimized properly, or just generally the lack of value. You think about, in my other lessons, we talked about user interactions and how our user interacts with your page. If Google puts that page in Google search and every time somebody clicks on it, they just leave immediately. What is that telling Google? It tells them that page is worthless. So enough of that type of data, Google's going to say, nope, get this thing out of here. So that's what you should worry about. And if you determine that pages aren't valuable, fix the page so Google doesn't account for it, or just delete it, right? I mean, because when you have too many pages on your site that are not being indexed, that's actually a very bad signal. And that's actually hurting your entire website as a whole. And so it's definitely an important thing for you to keep your eye on. So anytime you look in Google Search Console and you see a bunch of pages not indexed, then you should probably figure out why. The other thing in there, you'll see a section for your sitemaps. This is more of a thing where SEO guys are going to put your sitemaps in there. It's supposed to help Google digest your content and organize it. In there, it'll tell you whether you have which pages are indexed and which pages aren't, and which pages are seen, things like that. And then there's a section called removals where you can get pages removed. So that's the indexing section. Then there's an experience section. This is where Google's like scoring your pages, both mobile and desktop pages. And then under experience, there's also a little security section. So in the experience section is where you'll see Core Web Vitals. This is something that you may have heard about already. Core Web Vitals analyzes your mobile version of each page and your desktop version of each page. And it gives you a score on whether that page is poor, needs improvement, or good. And then it breaks down the issues that it sees. And those issues are kind of technical, but one of them being LCP, which stands for largest contentful paint, which basically is telling you how long it takes for a page to render the largest visible element. So when your page loads, how long does it take for that first visual to pop up? Okay. And so if that becomes an error, that means that it's taking too long for that to happen, because when Google they want to see that happen quickly, because then that means somebody's going to sit around and wait and see the rest of the page load. If it takes too long for that initial section to load, people are just going to leave. And that's going to create a bad experience, which is going to ultimately depress your entire website. The next thing that you might see under these errors is CLS, which stands for cumulative layout shift, which is how much the page shifts during the page when it loads. If your page loads on a desktop, you have different screen sizes. The sections on the page are shifting as it's loading. If it shifts too much, that's an error. On your mobile phone, it's even worse. You have all these different mobile versions, iPhones, Androids, different screen sizes. If you're not accounting for all those little elements, that means that shifting is going to be too much, which creates for a bad experience. Because, I mean, how many times have you seen a page load on a mobile and it's just hard to read because things are not lined up properly? That's this CLS. And then there's INP, interaction to next paint, which is how long does it take for the page to respond to user interactions? Like if you click on a button, things like that. That's the third element, which is the least likely one I see very often. I mostly see the CLS is the one I see the most errors on. Also in the experience section, you'll see security, HTTPS section, which tells you if your site's secure, if each page is secure. There's also shopping, which I'm not going to talk about today. Then there's enhancements. It's basically telling you if your page has certain enhancements like rich results, like if you have frequently asked question pages or reviews you want displayed in Google, or your site leak search box that shows up when you search your brand name, or videos displayed a certain way. It's going to tell you when you have those elements on your website, if they're structured properly to actually be displayed in Google the way they're intended. And then the last section in Google Search Console is security and manual actions. This is where, it's telling you if your site's been hacked or something like that, but it also tells you if Google is penalizing you. Sometimes you might have some type of structure set up the wrong way, and Google's going to give you a warning and say, hey, this isn't right. It's against our guidelines, go fix it. And sometimes on the extreme case, they'll actually consider your website spam, which would be a miracle if it ever happened in the franchise space, but it happens in other industries where Google sees that you're just trying to absolutely manipulate and game the system. And that's where they would take your website out of Google altogether. And here's where you would see those types of penalties. So there's a whole variety of them, but there's actually a place where Google is going to give you warnings and tell you things. And so that's where you would find all that. So that's the Google Search Console section. I'm already getting long-winded here, so let me try to get to the next section. The one thing I get brought up a lot, and I didn't mention yet, is website page speed. Okay. And everybody's like, I need my website faster. Your franchisees are going to go check your page speed and they're going to scream at you when it's not fast. Other agencies that are trying to win business or help your franchisees or whatever, they're going to go look and analyze your page speed and give you a hard time about it. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of how much that matters and why it matters. So website page speed is something that there's different tools that you can put your website in or a page in, and it's going to read it and load it and see how fast every element of the page loads. And then it gives you a score. Google has a page speed tester. They have Lighthouse is also a page speed tester. They're two in the same. There's a few other testers out there, GT Metrics, there's webpagespeed.org, and then there's a Pingdom. There's a few other ones out there. So you put them in there, you're going to get these different scoring mechanisms and different scores. So the one that's the least reliable is Google's. Okay. And so this is where, that's usually the one that your franchisees are going to go search for, or their little agencies trying to win you over and win their business over are going to go pull it up. And so it's also the one that's always just not as accurate. So I always take the Google one with a grain of salt, but essentially it's going to tell you whether you have what your page speed score is. It has a numbering system, and it's also going to tell you what it is on desktop and mobile. And, so that's what you have to go by. The other ones will give you scores as well. But let me tell you what really matters here. Google, all it really matters is the first element that loads. Google wants to see that happens as quickly as possible, which is why it's showing up in the Google Core Web Vitals, essentially. So when they see something's loading, then they know it's more likely that people are going to stay and watch the rest of it load, unless it just takes painfully a long amount of time after that. But that's really the first thing they look for. Of course, other things are going to load. And, the joke of this whole thing are the things that actually cause speed to be most painfully slow are actually Google things like embedding your Google map or a YouTube video. Those actually cause the biggest downfall of your page speed. So a lot of times you want to go disable those and then run the score and see what your score is, and then add those. And then you'll see a massive difference in that page speed. So, so the question becomes like, how much does this matter? There's two sides to it. There's how Google evaluates something for SEO and how a user is going to experience your website. And so let's start with how Google would evaluate things. You have to understand that there's 3 tiers of page speed. There's painfully slow, and then there's painfully fast, and then there's everybody else. So I would probably generalize this and say 10-20% of the websites are painfully fast, 10 to 20% of the websites are painfully slow, and there's everybody else. Everybody in the everybody else field are okay, gets the job done. So you're sitting there trying to fight and scratch to get yourself an A score. You go from a B to an A, or a 70 to a 90, or a 70 to an 80. You're going to feel good, but you're probably not going to see an impact in Google in the rankings or anything like that. Okay. Because Google doesn't really matter that much, or doesn't really care that much at that level. What they care about is when you're painfully slow. And if you can make a jump from painfully slow to painfully fast, that's where you see the difference. I actually took over a website and it was in the painfully slow bucket. We completely gutted it and rebuilt it and made it painfully fast. And once that thing went live, immediately rankings went up, traffic went up, and everything. So I've personally seen that correlation, but I have yet to see a correlation between going from that midsection where 80% of the websites are to fast, making that big of a difference when it comes to SEO and rankings. Now, where it might make a difference is users. So when your users come to your site and the site continually loads slow and takes forever, there's a good chance that some of them are going to leave or never come back. And so if that happens enough at a higher density over time, that might depress your rankings. Okay. So that's the risk you have, is that happening. Now, my opinion on this is, as long as you have over a 70, maybe an 80, I'd be very happy with that. And I would consider that good and not really going to hurt me and not really going to help me, but it's neutral. And then all the other things are going to get you to the finish line. So, the other things you can do, just make sure that first load is an important thing. And there's little tricks you can do to make Google, YouTube, and Google Maps loads last and things like that you can make things better. But it's really just little stuff that you can do to help from a user perspective that overall will possibly elevate your overall health. So hopefully that helps clear up the website page speed side of things. The last thing I want to point out is if you redesign or migrate your website, please get an SEO professional to help you, especially if the agency that you work with is a design agency, web design agency, and you don't see them very prominently positioning themselves as an SEO expert. A lot of these web design agencies are going to say they do SEO or they have SEO friendly websites, but that doesn't mean they actually do. And I still find lots of issues with a lot of them. So please, if you're going to make this, you have an existing franchise website and it's getting traffic and it has decent rankings and you're getting ready to make a change, please bring on a professional to kind of go alongside that project with you to make sure that you minimize your risk of losing a lot of traffic and rankings that could take many, many months to fix. So anyway, that is the section around website health. And I wanted to touch on the technical SEO stuff, and hopefully you learned something, and hopefully this is helpful to help you kind of understand what you should care about.